All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to do a quick
Absolutely.
little introduction about you. So, Morley Robbins is a MBA and CHC, is the creator of the Root Cause Protocol. He's also known as the Magnesium Man. He is one of the foremost experts on magnesium's role in the body and the delicate dance magnesium plays with copper, iron, and calcium. He received his BA in biology from, is it Denison? Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
University in Ohio, and holds an MBA from George Washington University in healthcare administration. I'm so excited. I have so many questions for you. So with that being said, tell us, oh, I should also say that Frances is also on the call, so you might hear her asking some questions. But so tell us about the role of copper during pregnancy.
Don't have any yes/no questions?
No.
No. So it's a wonderful way to start. So two of my favorite quotations deal with pregnancy. One was by a world-renowned expert in alpine physiology. His name was Sir Joseph Barcroft, famous in the UK, 1930s through the 70s. And he studied mountain climbers. And then towards the end of his career, he studied pregnancy. And his famous saying is, pregnancy is Mount Everest in utero. What he's telling people is that the womb is low oxygen. It's hypoxic. It's like we're at the top of Mount Everest. That Mount Everest has between 1% and 3% oxygen in the air. And that's exactly what the fetus has in the womb. And what's amazing about that is that each of us, but more recently, Drew, when he was in your womb, he started out as a parasite. It's not a mammal. Actually, starts out as a parasite. Over 9 months, matures into an anaerobic mammal. And then when it gets born, it takes on oxygen. It's finally ready to, because it got a download of copper from dear old mom in the last trimester. And what you may not know is that there's 3 different types of. So when you hear the word hypoxia, you immediately think of, I'm at the top of Mount Everest. And so the 3 forms of hypoxia are: 1, altitude. You are at the top of Mount Everest. Mm-hmm. 2nd is pathological hypoxia. And the neutrophil, which are some of the white blood cells, they're the Marines. They're the first defenders. They use oxygen and turn it into an oxidant to shoot at the pathogens, kill the pathogens. Very effective. But guess what you got to have to do that? You got to have copper to make that conversion. And so that's pathological hypoxia. Then there's a 3rd form. It's called functional hypoxia. And that's when you don't have enough bioavailable copper and you can't activate the oxygen to release the energy molecules in the mitochondria. So what's important to understand is that mitochondria are really critical to our day-to-day existence. They make the ATP that we use and rely on. And in the course of a typical day, we will make our body weight in ATP every day. That's a lot of ATP. Constant turnover, making energy and it's remade into ATP. And that process would release ADP to become ATP and to turn the expended ADP or AMP back into ATP. All required. Wow, isn't that amazing? And all of the antioxidant enzymes realize the oxidative stress that's building inside the mother's womb, ding, 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 requires copper. Now, the other quote that I love is from Mildred Seelig, and she was a physician and a mother. She was, I think she was a physician. And she started out as a drug researcher here in the States. And when she discovered that all of the drugs that she was researching caused magnesium loss, she resigned her position in pharma and became an educator and zealot for magnesium restoration and magnesium metabolism. And she wrote a very important textbook in 1980. Like, I call it her magnus opus. It's a book like this, explaining why magnesium is so darn important. There's 2 chapters on pregnancy. The key is, and it's on the title of the book you've got, Sam, is that the focus of that book is about cure your fatigue, because every symptom that we have about life is a manifestation of energy deficiency. So if we can't activate oxygen to release the energy molecules, well, we're going to have suboptimal energy production. And that's going to create oxidative stress. That oxidative stress is going to burn up magnesium. And her famous saying is, pregnancy is a magnesium deficient state from stem to stern. And I think she only had one child, but all you have to do is have one child and know what pregnancy is all about, what maternity is all about. And what's completely lost in the world of obstetrics, energy, the energy paradigm. And to give you a sense of the difference between men and women, go back to your high school biology textbook, and there's a picture of a cell. And we all can remember that picture. It was a nucleus. It was a crinkly thing called the endoplasmic reticulum. And with these funny little things called mitochondria. There were 2 or 3 of them in the picture. Well, what people didn't know is that that picture was drawn by Walt Disney. It has nothing to do with reality, because the average cell has 500 mitochondria. The average liver cell has 2,000 mitochondria. Kidney, 4,000. Heart cell, 10,000 mitochondria. And we come to the mature egg in a woman's body, the egg that produced crew, right? How many mitochondria do you think are in that ovum that became crew?
Oh God, I don't know. I'm guessing a lot.
600,000. 600,000. And the part that you don't know, and this is the work of Paul Kobine here in the States. He's actually, he got his education up in Saskatchewan, you know, that little town not far from where you live, probably. Is it a town or is it a region? I'm not sure I know.
It'd be like your states. It's a province here is what we call them.
What's the problem? So I think he went to the University of Saskatchewan. So what, he was in Calgary? Is that where he would have been? Whatever.
You would have been in Saskatoon.
Okay, so that's right. That's exactly right. I remember that name. So forgive me for being an ugly American. You know, so I just know you're north of the border, and it's cold, and it snowed today, and I really, my heart goes out to you. But and I've only been to Canada once, and I forgot my passport. I got fined $600, and I have a very bad memory about that. That was in Toronto, where it's still some level of civilization there. I don't know what it's like, you know, out your way. But so thank God you guys have a sense of humor. So Paul Kobine, smart guy, very smart guy, gets his doctorate at University of Saskatchewan, or University of Calgary, whatever the right But he's really talented. He's down in the States at Auburn University. And in 2004 and 2006, he figured out that the average mitochondria, you're sitting down, right?
Yeah.
So the average mitochondria has 50,000 atoms of copper.
Wow.
Times 600,000. So it takes a lot of copper to support just one egg, and you're dropping them every 28 days, right?
Mhm.
And why is that important? Is because it takes a lot of energy to support life. It's almost like Mother Nature thought this through, right?
Mhm.
Here's the difference between men and women. So a man, per ejaculation, might produce 2 billion sperm, but each one only has 1 or 2 mitochondria. And that's the difference between men and women. And so women are about the concentration of energy, they're about the dispersion of energy. And my favorite scene is from a Woody Allen movie where there's one black sperm amongst a bunch of white sperm, and they're going to think, "How did that guy get in here?" It's great. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's the priceless scene. I think it's kind of guys would laugh at that. But the point is, pregnancy is incredibly dependent upon minerals. Don't have enough copper, you can't get pregnant for 2 reasons. You can't produce enough energy, but you can't produce enough antioxidant enzymes neutralize the oxidative stress that comes with the union of the egg and the sperm, natural part of the process. Any animal farmer knows that if their animals are not producing offspring, there's only one element they add to the feed, called copper. And so this copper thing becomes really, really important, especially during pregnancy. And so in the work that I do and work that I've inspired, particularly as it relates to pregnancy, get people to focus on magnesium, copper, and retinol. Because if you have retinol, you make the copper bioavailable, which will regulate the iron and prevent the magnesium that comes with pregnancy. Here's modern obstetrics. They obsess about iron and vitamin D, the exact opposites, right?
Yeah.
And
And
so
prenatal.
the
They love
optics,
their prenatals.
I'm sorry,
They love their prenatals.
they love
Which,
their prenatals. And that's where you're going to find a lot of iron and vitamin D. There's some prenatals here in the States. I don't know whether it's true up in Canada or in Europe, wherever, but you can get as much as 65 milligrams of iron in 1 day's worth of prenatal. Well, that's a month's worth of iron. It's way too much.
yeah.
And so another famous copper expert, so you've got Paul Colbine at Auburn University, you have Jamie Collins, University of Florida in Gainesville, which is not too far from Francis. He's done studies with rodents and given them the amount of iron, comparable amount of iron that a human would get, scale it down for the rodent. So we're the 2-legged rats, they're the 4-legged rats, and they scale it down, find that when they give them the same amount of iron that we would have gotten, copper metabolism collapses in the rodents. So the role that copper plays in pregnancy is legendary. And the other side of it is there's an article that I can send you that talks about premature birth and preeclampsia.
Mm.
So, a miscarriage would be a premature birth, and preeclampsia is a very serious condition and lead to death. And in both cases, those are building because oxidative stress is building. Energy is not being made properly. Oxygen is being produced, or oxidative stress is being produced. uric acid. Uric acid is billowing black smoke coming out of the mitochondria and renew ATP. So what happens is ATP becomes ATP, ADP becomes MP, AMP becomes IMP becomes hypoxanthine, becomes xanthine, becomes uric acid. And what's happening as this conjugation is taking place, the body, the womb, the placenta, trying to get whatever energy it can from the phosphate groups. When it gets down to uric acid, they're gone. And then the exhaust comes out. And building uric acid will cause both premature birth and preeclampsia. And what do they do in the delivery room when a woman goes into preeclampsia? They'll give them magnesium, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of, they slide in at the last second and give people a bolus of magnesium to try to offset the aging amount of oxidative stress that's been building in that body for 9 months, thinking that that's going to make up for it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. The other side of it is with the premature birth, like my mother's mother, she was born premature. I think it was like 8 weeks premature. And it's the last 12 weeks of the pregnancy that are the most important, because that's when the mom downloads 70 milligrams of copper from her liver to the fetus's liver. And this is true for all mammals. This isn't just humans. It's all mammals download copper in the last trimester. And then where does the retinol come? In the breast milk, the first 12 to 18 months of life. That copper and that retinol become bioavailable copper that help run the immune system called the spleen. And so it's just, unfortunately, I could probably go on for another hour, but I think you kind of get the gist of where copper is playing a critical role for energy production, critical role for diffusing oxidative stress, critical role for stopping symptoms of some very troubling outcomes in pregnancy. And the tragedy is that women your age don't know any better, and the practitioners that you're working with have not been trained in this. And
Well, and part of the issue
we can
is
take.
that they've got, I
Go
mean,
ahead.
I can think of many of my friends that have been taking acid blockers. God, what else are they taking during pregnancy? Iron medication. They're taking a bunch of, medication that's really depleting the minerals. So not only is
Yeah,
pregnancy really taxing on the body, but you're adding this medication to it, which is not helping at all.
absolutely true. And people are not aware of the price they pay in those medications.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a very important issue. It's total confusion around this. So make a note that I'm going to send you the article about the premature birth and preeclampsia. Another article that I'm going to send you is by Philip Steer, Steer. He's a famous obstetrician in England, Mother England. And he wrote a very important article in 1995 about what's the hemoglobin level in a healthy mother who produces the healthiest babies. What's the correlation between hemoglobin level and basically APGAR score? And what you probably know is that in the world of convention, if the mother's hemoglobin drops below 12, practitioners get nervous. If it drops below 10, they go crazy.
Mhm.
And what Dr. Steer discovered, 150,000 births. Well, I would have been impressed if he'd done 150. Even 1,500 would have been a lot. But 150,000 is a rather staggering study. And what he found is that the healthiest babies were born to moms who had a hemoglobin of 8.5, 9.5, or 85 and 95, depending on how you calibrate the unit. And that flies in the face of convention today. Absolutely conflicts with the recommendations. What he also says, which is very, very important, the third article that I'm going to send you is by Myra, M-E-I-R-A, Fields, 1990, Copper Deficiency in Pregnancy. And you're both going to want to have your feet in a magnesium foot bath when you find out how devastating copper deficiency is in pregnancy. And what both Dr. Steer and Dr. Fields point out is that serum ferritin, which is now regularly monitored and measured in pregnancy, is completely irrelevant and inaccurate in a pregnant woman's body. Why is that? It's very simple. Again, let's go back to Crew. How old is Crew now?
6 months.
Okay, so 15 months ago, he was a parasite. And your body
He agrees.
And he agrees, right? That's right. And if he could fist pump right now, we'd do that. So your body, Sam, knew that you had a parasite and instructed your spleen, stand down. We don't need an immune response. I'm producing a baby. And the spleen starts to power down, lowers the immune function, which lowers the ferritin release and allows the baby to become a mammal. And that misunderstanding about the physiological genius of the pregnant woman's body, it's like this idea that Mother Nature doesn't understand how to bring a fetus to the term. No, it's the practitioners that don't have a clue what's going on. And so your body powered down, your spleen powered down, your ferritin powered down. That event is being misinterpreted all over the globe now as being a sign of low iron. Mom needs more iron, and it's leading to greater use of prenatals, greater use of iron supplementation. I've had 2 clients, that iron infusions the last week of their pregnancy. Both women almost died, and both babies almost died because of a misunderstanding about not knowing about the research here, who proved that this is a completely irrelevant issue.
So,
that's what we're up against.
So what would be the benefits of blood test when you're pregnant then, and what should women be looking for?
Can't do a blood test when a woman's pregnant, unfortunately, because the body blows up. It literally, especially around copper and iron, it becomes almost irrelevant. What I would suggest is, like, for you, Francis, when you decide to have a child, that's when you want to take your blood test and find out where you are, or do it right now. Do a blood test right now. And Sam, you could do it now as well, although it probably would be better to do it after you finish testing. But Francis, what you would find is, what are you working with? What's your foundational status? And then Sam, what you would find out is, to what extent has Crew depleted my retinol? Because you're running dry. You're 6 months into breastfeeding, and unless you're really robust about your diet, it's very likely you don't have enough retinol for the download that he needs to get on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, and when I was reading your book, there was one thing that really stood out to me, and it was where was I going to go with that now? Oh, I had it on the tip of my tongue.
All right. We can come back to it.
We'll come back to it. I'll think about it. Okay,
You know,
so
they say the mind is the first to go. It's called mama brain, right?
It is. It is.
You gave up a lot for Prue. Do you have more than one child?
Yeah, I have two. I have an older one he's 3. And then I
He's
have
3. Okay.
Yeah, and then I have the other one.
So the bookends of stress on planet Earth, this is important for people to understand. The bookends of stress are guys in foxholes worrying about death and moms in birthing suite worrying about life. There's no more stressful events on this planet. And second only to those, just to give people a grasp, and when you are in it, when you have that level of stress, you are losing minerals so fast, you would make your head spin.
Yeah, there was
People don't understand the price they pay.
no. And from my first pregnancy to my second were completely different, where I had a better understanding of the role that minerals played when I was pregnant with Crew. And so I would make sure that I was adding, I actually had element salt that I was adding to my water.
Right.
And I was taking magnesium every day. And I knew that when I was getting enough, because I wasn't having leg cramps at night, and as soon as I was getting that, I was like, well, that's a good sign, but I obviously need more, because if I'm just floating with that line where I'm just not getting the leg cramp, then it means I still need to get more in. I feel like it was in your book, the thought came back to me. But when I was pregnant with Crew, I had my blood work done and my iron came back low. They were concerned about ferritin, and it was 14. And so I went to the naturopath.
You just produced a parasite. That's why it's at 14.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with your iron status.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that from what I understand from listening to a few podcasts, is it's also difference between where the iron is being stored, whether or not it's in your, like the blood or in the organs, right?
So, so there's 3 containers for measuring iron in the body. First container is a bucket. And how big a bucket is. So the bucket of iron in the body is hemoglobin. And that's 70% of the iron in the body is found in hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is hanging out in the red blood cells. There's a zillion hemoglobin in one red blood cell. There's a lot of hemoglobin in the body. If you add myoglobin to that, which is found in the muscles, and what do hemoglobin and myoglobin do? They're waiters, carrying oxygen one way and carrying carbon dioxide another. They're just waiters, and they're dumber than a box. So hemoglobin, big bucket of iron. We have a teacup. Have you ever seen a teacup? I know you've been to Starbucks, but have you actually seen a teacup? You know, they're really tiny, right?
Yes. Our grandmother's British, so we've seen teacups.
Okay, it's a teacup. And crumpets and things. So a teacup is really small. It's 8 ounces, technically. It's not a venti, Starbucks for 36 ounces, whatever. But that is it's ferritin. Ferritin is the iron storage protein. It's 10% of the iron in the body. It's stored inside the cells. It is not supposed to be the blood, which is outside the cells. Big difference between inside and outside. And so 10% is ferritin. And here's the part that's going to trouble people who are going to be listening to this conversation. The ferritin that shows up in the blood has been secreted, principally from the liver, sometimes from the kidney, and also from the spleen. Being secreted because there's metabolic stress. It's not happy ferritin. Here's the part that will really trouble people, is there's actually 3 different forms of ferritin. They're called heavy chain, and heavy is referring to copper, heavy metal. So heavy chain runs on the energy of copper inside the heart, inside the kidney, inside the nucleus, mitochondria. Heavy chain is really important. It's like an ATM machine. Put iron in, take it out. Put in, take it out. But you got to have copper to do that. It doesn't work without copper. There's a second form of ferritin called light chain. There's no copper. And it uses hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide is like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. But it takes more force. It's not as clean. And there's static in them. And light chain is found in the liver and the spleen, principally. Very interesting. Then we have a third form of that you've never heard of. It's called glycosylated. So its sugars have been added to the ferritin inside the organ that's under stress. And when it gets glycosylated, which means adding glucose to it, heating it up, is dumping the iron in the tissue. It's cleaving off 10 amino acids. And this is just the light chain where it happens. And then that light chain ferritin, being glycosylated, is released into the bloodstream. It has no iron. And what the world believes is that the level of serum ferritin tells me how much iron I have in storage, and it would be like measuring your air tire pressure to know how much gas you have in your car. They have nothing to do with each other. It is completely irrelevant. I'm serious. This is, and I'm not, this is not, oh, Morley, you're just making stuff up. This is Morley quoting Dr. Jacobs, Dr. Warwood, Dr. Rosio, some of the leading hematologists. You know where the confusion about ferritin started? It was Jacobs et al. Warwood was the second author on that article, 1972, in a British medical journal. This world-renowned team of British hematologists said, oh, stop focusing on hemoglobin. Let's put the spotlight on ferritin. That's a really good marker. Yeah. And it really tells us what's going on. And the world of medicine has never been the same. Because from the time of the U.S. Civil War, 1860s, all the way up to 1972, every clinician knew that to measure iron status, you looked at the bucket because it was the biggest concentration of iron in the body. But then Jacobs et al., wink, wink, got everyone to go down to the teacup, even though the ferritin in the blood has this much iron. Then we have a third container. It's called a thimble. You probably have never used a thimble, but you played with a thimble when you didn't know. So do you know what a thimble is?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Have you ever used one? No, you've never used one.
I was a star.
Your grandmother.
I was a star sewing student,
I'm
so I
sorry?
did. I like sewing, so I've used a thimble.
Okay, good for you. That's great. It's a lost art. And that is the amount of, it's 1% of the iron. 1% of the iron is called serum iron. But it's one of the most important measures, which is what's the status of the iron that's being recycled in the blood every day, 24/7. And so people say that they are anemic or they've been told anemic. The very first question I say is, which marker? Bucket, the teacup, or the thimble? Because it has relevance. And I've renamed the protein ferritin, and I call it errortin, because more mistakes have been made using that as an indication of iron status that has then led to iron supplementation, iron fortification, iron infusions, and it's killing humanity, especially the pregnant mom and her fetus. And people don't understand that. So the low iron that's used in pregnancy is Philip Steer's hemoglobin, and it needs to be in the second half of the pregnancy. It's going to go from what's considered a normal 12 and a half. It's going to drop down. It can go as low as 8 and a half, and it's still okay. And that will drive the practitioners crazy all over the globe, but especially in North America, because they are in lockstep movement that people must have hemoglobin at least a 12. The heartache for me, ladies, is my daughter-in-law is an obstacle. You finished your training at a little school in Boston. I'll let you connect them.
So I feel like it might have been on a podcast that I heard you say it, but it was like an aha moment for me because, like I said, my iron was, quote unquote low, and they were worried about, the delivery and blood loss, and that was the reason why I was told that iron needed to be nice and high. So I did take, I had iron supplements that I took for the last 3 weeks, I want to say, of the pregnancy. And I was already taking like desiccated beef liver. And so I was really confused, and I cook in a cast iron. And I was like, I don't understand how it's possibly low when, I do things to help keep it high. So
your healthy body was doing exactly what Mother Nature wanted.
yes.
The ferritin was going down, hemodilution. Have you heard that term?
Yeah.
Hemodilution? And what that means is Mother Nature wants you to produce breast milk. In order to do that, she needs to move the hemoglobin away from the womb where the baby needs it. And cannot produce breast milk if your hemoglobin is too high. It will stop the natural production of breast milk. And so your practitioner means well, but doesn't know well.
Yes. Well, and it's funny that you say that, because this time around I actually had issues with my milk supply, whereas the first time around where I didn't have any iron supplementation or anything like that, there was no issues with my supply. But I had blood work done after Crew was born, and I wanted to check on everything, and it was around 8 weeks, and my cholesterol came back. It was just out of whack. And they were like, we don't know why it's all out of whack. And then I remember hearing you say, well, it's because it's probably because I was taking those iron supplements, and it really set off this whole cascade of everything going forward.
Absolutely right. You took iron, it puts your copper metabolism in a state of fusion. And what's important to understand is that oxygen hasn't always been on the planet. And people get nervous when I start talking about billions of years. Well, let's say a billion years was one day in the Bible. Okay, so billions of years ago, there was no oxygen. And then cyanobacteria, about 3.5 billion years ago, started playing footsie with the sunlight. That's called photosynthesis. That photosynthesis started to produce oxygen in the primordial sea, and it started to build up in the seabed, and then it got into the atmosphere. Oxygen started to get released into the atmosphere. We're talking a long time ago, and how the astrobiologists know this. It's just like, really? How do you know this? You're looking at a photograph, but the thing is, they feel very strongly about this. And when there was 0.1% oxygen in the air, today there's 21%. 0.1% wiped out 99% of life on the planet. Why? Because it was all anaerobic. Like Crew when he started out in your other child in your womb, and anaerobes cannot be around oxygen, and so they died. But what's fascinating is what came on the heels of that. That was called the Great Oxygen Event. GOE. You can look it up. It's fascinating time period, and there's all sorts of graphics around it. You see where the dinosaurs were, and it's amazing how life changed as oxygen was more plentiful on the planet. But the point is, what saved life on this planet was copper, and what Paul Kobine, back to Auburn University, what he has said is life is impossible on planet Earth without copper. It's a pretty bold thing to say. So it turns out it was enzymes called multi-copper, this big term, MCOs. You have about 1,000 different forms of them in your gut that you never knew about. But one of the most important MCOs is the complex that runs your mitochondria. And you have 40 quadrillion mitochondria. That's 15 zeros. That's a lot of mitochondria. And there's a complex 4 in every one of them. And that's the place where oxygen gets turned into 2 molecules of water. It's the most important chemical reaction on the planet. Because when that oxygen becomes water, it releases energy molecules. Really important. And so the other element that came at the same time, or about the same time, something called melatonin. You've heard of it. It wasn't a sleep aid back then. It's not a sleep aid now. It's the master antioxidant hormone in our mitochondria. Guess what? Can't make it without copper. Ding, ding, ding. Then there's this third element that was created in response to oxygen. Oh, yeah. Cholesterol got made a long time ago. Cholesterol is not a disease agent. It takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. So cholesterol is an oxygen sink. Guess what happened? You had that blood test, Sam, 8 weeks after you produced a baby.
Mhm.
You just expended every bit of copper you had in your body. And your body is really smart. Believe it or not, it's really, really smart. It knew you didn't have enough copper, knew that you just gone through all kinds of stress on the planet, and ramped up cholesterol production to grab the oxygen to save you from oxidative stress, because it would have disrupted even more so your ability to make.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
What modern obstetrics has done, or midwifery, whatever the modality is, what they've done is they've taken every natural response of the body from a very stressful event and turned it into a disease.
Mhm.
Low ferritin, oh, it's a disease. High cholesterol, oh, it's a disease. Oh, bleeding, that's a disease. No. Why does bleeding occur during pregnancy? Because the body says, thank God, I got a chance to get rid of the excess iron. The only way to get rid of excess iron is through blood loss. Now, here's an important factoid. There's only 2 reasons why women are smarter than men.
Just 2 reasons.
2 reasons. Oh, wait, excuse me, let me rephrase it. There's 2 reasons why women outlive men. Reasons why women, one, they're smarter. You have more electrical energy in your brain than I do. believe it or not. The women's design is the Tesla coil in your brain is better than my Tesla. It will last longer because of that. Second reason, you have monthly blood loss. For 40 years, from the time you're maybe 13 to your late 50s, you're going to have monthly blood loss, and you're dumping iron every month. And what you want to do is make sure it lasts, that process lasts into your late 50s, because you're going to be a much healthier woman as a result of it, both during your adulthood and then in your postmenopausal years. Do not celebrate an early menopause. That means you're probably going to get neurodegeneration.
Mhm.
People need to really flip this paradigm quickly and realize that the meme that runs medicine is you're anemic and you're copper toxic, old-faced lie, living in a post-1984 world where everything is flipped, black is white, white is black, and you want more copper and you want to lower your iron footprint. And that's a fact, and that's what the book's about, that's what the root cause protocol is about, and that's what the handbook tries to reinforce.
Well, and it's really important too, like what you had just said about the blood loss, because if we think about it from the perspective of birth control, where women aren't even getting periods,
God.
they're just getting the withdrawal bleed, which isn't even it, you know.
Very good point. You're absolutely right. And it's again, never having had a period, I can imagine how inconvenient it is. But now, in my later years, having spent 15 years studying iron dysregulation, like, oh my God, it's like, and there are women within the RCP community who were in menopause, regained their period, and they're excited because they
Mhm.
know why it's so important. And so
Yeah.
people need to really rethink the dynamic of the monthly blood loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I kind of been mulling over a little bit, because I was just looking into the mini pill and the effects of it. And I was having a really hard time even coming up with like a post for Instagram to do on it, because I feel like we've been misled and misfed.
Yeah.
Because when we're looking at what the positives and the negatives are to it, we're picking the end result, which isn't how things work. We're picking to say, well, you're not becoming pregnant, so this is why it's a good option. When in reality, that has nothing to do with how it's working. You're just looking at it as if you want that to happen, so that means that it's good, when really it's a mineral depletion, it's a vitamin, it makes you deficient in all these things. But the way that we approach it seems silly when I started thinking about it, because it's not truthful. We're just deciding how we want the outcome to be.
People have not been given full disclosure of
No.
the choices they made. They don't know the second and third order cost of their decision.
And I remember when I started birth control, the one that I was on for 13 plus years was one where it was like a 3-month cycle, where after 3 months, then you were supposed to get your period. And I remember the doctor explaining it to me that it's better to save your eggs. You don't want to lose them each month. And that was their narrative that I was told as the reason for wanting it.
There's a wonderful movie that you guys probably would enjoy. It's called Ghosts in Your Genes. And it's a 5-part series where you learn about the diet of your grandparents dictates the vitality of the eggs that you carry, right? That you are carrying right now.
Yeah.
Thank your grandmother, whatever she was eating will dictate the vitality of your eggs. And only to go one step farther beyond insanity with what you just said about you don't want to use up all those eggs. I had a client, a woman, she was probably in her early 30s, struggling with all sorts of issues. But her biggest issue was she was constipated. And the only day when she had a bowel movement was the day she started her menstrual block. Okay? one day a month, she had a bowel movement. And she went to the doctor about it. And he said, well, that's your normal. It's just, are you kidding? That's your normal. You know, you're not human, doctor. What are you? What rock did you crawl out of?
So I have one more question for you, and then I think so the time is, well, I feel like we could talk forever about all this, and then I'll see if Francis has any questions for you. But when women take iron supplements, especially when they're pregnant, they have more energy. So what is the reason for when they take iron supplements? Why does that increase their energy?
Great question. So iron is a heavy metal. You would get the same reaction if you took arsenic or if you took lead. No, serious. No, it's true. Any heavy metal. No, I'm serious.
I know you are, but it just I appreciate the examples that you.
So any heavy metal will force the bone marrow to create more red blood cells, carry more oxygen. But the analogy I use for people is I said, you can use cocaine to wake up, and you can use alcohol to go to sleep. They really work. They're amazing how effective they are. But there's a very, very heavy price to pay. The fourth article, and I hope someone's keeping track of these articles because
I am.
I base. Right. The fourth article that I'll send you is by Robert Hodges, 1978, where he talks about, it's the only study I've ever seen where they measured iron metabolism over a several-year period. They withheld retinol and they introduced retinol, and you study that article and understand what it's saying, your jaw will drop. Because what he proves beyond a shadow of a doubt is that, yes, when you introduce iron into the diet, there is a momentary rise in hemoglobin, and about 6 weeks later, it collapses. And this is what happens. People get into a 6-week cycle. And they'll take their iron, and then it'll fall off, and they'll get fatigued, and they'll go back to iron, it'll fall off. And what he was able to show in the study is that when he introduced retinol, hemoglobin had a steady rise and stayed elevated to get back to normal. It's a very powerful study that was done. The only study that I know of where anyone looked at it, all the different variables over a multi-year period. And that study eviscerates the idea that we need iron in order to get more energy. And I think it was in that article where he talks about any heavy metal will help you feel better because it's going to jumpstart the process of making red blood cells, because the body knows it's got to have energy to get rid of that heavy metal.
So if somebody was looking to take retinol, or sorry, I should rephrase that. If somebody's looking to make sure that the foods that they're consuming contain retinol, or making sure that they get the amount of copper that they need, where are the few best places for them to start?
Well, the book you've got, the handbook that you've downloaded, will talk about sources for retinol. There's a handful of them. So you have grass-fed beef liver, you have grass-fed heavy cream, the yard eggs is a very, very important source. Retinol, or the yolk will have retinol in it. You have cod liver oil is another very rich source, but there are like 100 different brands of cod liver oil. I really recommend two now. There's Formula IQ has a wonderful cod liver oil, and then there's Rosita's. So Rosita's is the Rolls Royce. Formula IQ is a Mercedes 700 series. It's a really nice form. And so those would be in the food system. The challenge we've got is on the copper side, because we want to believe that copper is still in the food. And I don't think it is in the way that our ancestors had it. And so farming chemicals have had a devastating effect. And you can look up, there's a new update of the presence and use of glyphosate. I think it's North America. I'm certain it's America, but I think it goes into Canada as well. And what's one of the biggest products of Canada?
Roundup.
Canola oil.
Yes.
Canola oil, right? It's GMO. Means it's using glyphosate. Means
Yeah.
it's full of toxins. Glyphosate is a perfect chelator of copper. It's outrageous the way it works. And so the sources of copper are dwindling. And in 2020, when I realized what was really happening, I renamed that event. COV stands for Copper's Vanished. ID stands for Iron's Dysregulated. Because I know about the important research in 1928 in two separate universities that proved that a low copper diet produces a high iron animal. And so that's what 2020 was all about. And in 2021, I vowed to solve that product called Recuperate, which you get from Formula IQ. Just Google it. Recuperate, that's my unending wit. Recuperate. And having amazing results with people, especially people with long COVID, wink, wink. And, but people looking for more energy, finding it's very helpful. The limitation is that the book was written before supplement was made. There's no mention of Recuperate in the book. So I'm going to update the book. And there's no mention of COVID in the book either, which I think is a blessing. People don't get stuck with that detour that we got into. So I think people need supplemental copper because it's disappearing from the soil, it's disappearing from the food, it's disappearing from the tissue of humans. And we just live in a very different era than our ancestors. If you're at all familiar with the work of Weston A. Price, who's a world-renowned dentist from Cleveland, who studied ancestral eating, especially Aboriginal diets, and he was looking for perfect teeth, as you probably know. But what most people don't know is what got him started. And he was what's
He was
that?
seeing that his patients' children were coming in, and within one generation, they were having like crowding of the teeth and spinal disorders.
That's exactly right. It was a galvanizing event that changed his life. And that's what motivated him and his wife, Isabel, to travel the globe for 10 summers, study and identify those 14 communities. He did a root canal on his 10-year-old son. And guess what happened? He died. So shattered by that experience. And he wanted to find communities of people that had perfect teeth. And what Dr. Price knew is that when we are a fetus, first forming as a parasite, we have 32 buds. And those 32 buds split, become 64 buds. 32 buds become our teeth. What do the other 32 become?
Your spine?
Their spine. Exactly right. And Dr. Price knew that perfect teeth meant perfect spine meant perfect. And that's what he was looking for. What are the foods that bring energetic metabolic vitality to the fullest expression of the face, the arch, the dental expression? And that's what drove him, is the loss of his son is what sparked his desire to understand. And I think what he was really gifted at was understanding retinol really understood retinol. And I think if he had kept at it, he would have had the same passion for copper when he realized that retinol is essential to activate the copper enzymes that load copper into all the enzymes that run and regulate our body.
Mhm.
And so that the book that you've got, Sam, word is CURE, and there's a little box around the CU for copper. And what that word really means is copper regulates everything. And that's why it's so important. And it's been lost to humanity over the last century. And I'm just doing my part to build on the legion of incredible scientific studies that have been done that are all of those studies now are stored with the Ark of the Covenant in the Indiana Jones warehouse. I'm just trying to bring it out into the open, let people know that there's a lot of good information. And I'm thrilled to have conversations like this to let everyone know that there's more to the story. We have been misled and misfed, as you said. And a very important phrase that I use is missing information equals missing truth. One of my friends, he's the husband of one of my students, who's now become a very dear friend of mine. His name is Joey Foster, pastor in Southern Maryland. And that was a mantra of his training as a pastor, because it was introduced to him how to have debates about the Bible. Well, now what we're doing is having debates about our diet, what's healthy and what's ideal. And if you don't know all of the nuance, like if you don't know that the ferritin in the blood is empty of iron and it's glycosylated, which means it's sugary. And the more sugar it has, the longer it lasts. And what does that really mean? If you don't know about that, then you don't know the truth of your iron status because you've been misled.
Absolutely. Francis, do you have a quick question or
Okay, let's see. I'm going to do my best to summarize it to 3 questions. So
Francis,
my
one, we have we're at an
That's
hour.
okay. No, we're okay. I've got time. It's all right.
you can
That's all
just
right.
cut me out if you want to upload the
Do you know
rest.
how patient Francis has been her whole life? But especially in the last hour, she's so patiently waited. Go ahead and answer your questions.
Okay, so I think one of the reasons why I really loved the episode that you did with Courtney on Real Foodology was because I also had the copper IUD. I ended up having a plethora of issues that kind of came along with it. And I was so hell-bent that it was the copper that was the issue. I actually ended up going into my doctor's office about a month before I ended up having it removed, and trying to get them to do hormone tests and blood work because I wanted to know what was going on. My hair was falling out. Like I mentally didn't feel great. Like my anxiety was really high. But I was so proud of myself because I started looking up, like, what does copper bind to? Like, what is it that they need to be testing? And I actually went in and I said, listen, I don't even know how to pronounce this, but I want this test done. And I was so proud of myself because it was the ceruloplasmin test. And I was, the only thing was it came back within their normal range. So what is an optimal range, and does that truly test the bioavailability of copper?
So what was your number? Do you remember?
I actually pulled it up in preparation for this. So
Sam, she should have this memorized, so she gets dinged for this. I've known it like that.
So mine was 32 milligrams.
So 2 famous scientists, Sternlieb, L-I-E-B, Sternlieb and Steinberg, were studying human copper and ceruloplasmin in an AT&T Bell Lab in upstate New York. It was a phone company studying human metabolism. That's a, well, you know, the phones back then had copper bells, breast bells, so that must have been the connection, right?
Mhm.
And so what they discovered is that the ideal copper for the human is 100, and the ideal ceruloplasmin 30, and the ideal ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin is 3.33. Now, you know that your ceruloplasmin is 32.
Mhm.
What was your copper level, Francis?
They did not test my copper. I went
Do,
back.
do you know that?
They didn't test it. So they did a standard blood
Okay.
analysis, and then they ordered the ceruloplasmin as well because I would not come off of it. But
Okay.
the copper
Okay.
isn't
That's fine. So an important teachable moment, you never do an iron test without copper and ceruloplasmin. And people can look up the full Monty iron panel, and you can go to request the test. But there's 13 markers in that blood test. But you always look at copper and iron together because they're joined at the elbow of each other. And so 32 sounds normal, but I'm going to bet that your copper was probably 130, much higher. Let's say it was 130, just for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Ideal's 100. Because you had a copper IU, it's going to throw copper into your system. So let's divide 130 divided by 32. That's a 4.06, 4.1. So that ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin needs to be looked at logarithmically.
Okay.
So it's an earthquake of 3.33 is very different than an earthquake of 4.0 or earthquake of 4.1. 4.1 is 8 times greater than a 3.3. Big deal. And so when that number is higher than 3.33, it's not an ordinal difference, it's a magnificently bigger number. But what it's an indication of is inflammation. And so what the copper IUD does is it does trigger inflammation. And what doctors have been trained to do is blame copper. And so what people need to know is that there's 100 milligrams of copper in the body, and there's 5,000 milligrams of iron. But when copper is the general, iron is the foot soldier. You don't need to be in the military to know that copper, the generals, are more important than grunts. And so what happens is when the copper becomes unbound from ceruloplasmin down to other proteins like histidine, transcuprine, or albumin, it doesn't have the same punch as it does when it's with ceruloplasmin. Iron begins to act out. And it's the iron that's causing the inflammation. It's iron that's causing symptoms, but copper always gets blamed. So what you would need to do, what I would encourage you, is drop some coin and do the full Monty iron panel. And then we can make that the basis of the second round of copper. We can analyze it, let people know what's going on. Sam, I don't know, you might be able to do it. You're you're 6 months postpartum. It's going to be a little distorted, but it would be interesting to see what would show up in your body right now.
Yeah,
I think what we've got to do is have a contest. Yeah, we got to do a contest. We got to see who's more metabolically sound.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question. So, one of the things that kind of popped up after late into having the copper IUD and then still months after having it removed is I've been having these rashes, and I can't figure out like what is kind of sparking it. Like I drink like dandelion root tea to try and support my liver. I don't take ibuprofen. So like other than general stress, I like to think that I'm being pretty kind to it.
First strike, I would say your spleen is struggling. And real quick, back to your blood test. that copper to ceruloplasmin ratio is a good marker. It's not a definitive marker. There are 5 definitive markers for copper. None of them are allowed to be used in commercial labs. Why? Because they reveal too much. So we're left in the dark. But as it relates to the rash, I guess there is some liver stress, but the liver is stressing because the spleen is not happy.
Mhm.
And one option you've got, there's a company called Standard Process. It's very popular with acupuncturists and chiropractors, principally. And they have a product called Spleen PMG. And Spleen PMG will help to rebuild your spleen. The spleen is notorious for allergies and any kind of autoimmune condition. When the spleen gets filled up with iron, it's going to throw off the immune system. And that would be my first instinct. Don't have any tests to prove it. Would be interesting to see what the blood test would reveal. So if you want to be gung-ho, find a practitioner who has spleen PMG, or if you want to be more conservative, get the blood test. We'll talk about it, and then you can decide what you want.
Okay. And then my last question, because I can see Sam eyeballing me on the other side.
We're doing fine.
So,
We're doing fine. People have a much longer attention span than we give them credit. When we're talking about the truth, people will sit still for hours on end. They're
Okay.
mesmerized by the truth.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So for example, I know a girl who has PCOS, she's on birth control, and she was telling me the other day that she was taking an iron supplement and she was getting nauseous after taking the iron supplement. What would cause the nausea?
What do you think would cause it?
Well, obviously the iron really taking over and not enough copper.
Right. But what is the body telling her?
Stop
What
taking
is
it.
the body saying? I have too much. I
Yes.
can't metabolize it. And write this other article down. I will have a hard time finding it, but I'll do my best to find it. But it's an Indian study of PCOS comparing activity level of ceruloplasmin, not its height, IQ. There's a difference. And comparing activity of ceruloplasmin to the thickness of the endometrial wall. And the weaker the ceruloplasmin expression was, thicker the endometrial wall was, as in PCOS. Why? Because what's happening is, as ceruloplasmin cannot express ferroxidase, what allows iron recycling to occur, iron builds up in the tissue, and when ceruloplasmin is low, estrogen rises, because estrogen is an antioxidant. The backup plan to low ceruloplasmin function. So PCOS is a classic expression of low bioavailable copper, high iron, and high estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why she's taking the iron supplements is because her ceruloplasmin is low, her iron recycling is low. Her iron is low in the blood, but it's raging in her tissues, especially in her womb. And her doctor does not understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. Sam kind of touched on it a little bit of like finding foods that are high in vitamin A. What are your thoughts on creams that are high in retinol and like whatever that kind of fad is?
Well, ideally, I'd much rather have it coming from food. Finding regenerative farmers who understand the importance of soil composition, soil health. All dirt farmers. Well, the better farmers are like Joel Shalatin here in the States. They're grass farmers. They're not dirt farmers. They're worrying about the quality, the mineral, and the nutrient quality of the grasses and produce that they're producing. That's changing. People, more and more farmers are understanding that. They're going back to the old ways. It can't happen fast enough. And so if you can find the right farmer, if you can find the right sorts of those creams, go for it. I think it's great. It's just, it's not as prevalent we
Mhm.
would like it to be,
Are you telling me that the quality ones are not on the drugstore shelf?
but it would be far preferable. I mean, you're not going to find it in a store. You're going to find it in a farm. You're going to need to find the farmer and make contact directly.
Mhm.
And I don't know what, I don't know where the farmers hang out in Tampa. You're going to have to go out into the middle of the state to find the dairy farms. They're not going to be
Yeah.
in, not going to be in Tampa.
Yes.
There are, there are, look, you can use a website. I think it's rawmilk.com. Weston A.
Yeah.
Price sponsored,
Yeah.
rawmilk.com. You'll find dairy farmers on that site in your area. You might have to drive an hour, but you'll find them.
Okay. I'll save my
That's
questions for next time.
okay. That's great. That's all right. And we don't, we don't want to rustle up the older sister, right?
I have to stay in my lane at least a little bit so that I can get what I want down the road.
Exactly. You're more of a strategist. That's good. Right? Yeah. Sam plays checkers. Francis plays chess. Right. I get it. Right. That's good.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Absolutely.
Like you were referencing, this is the book that you were talking about, and
You know what's really cool about the way you just held that up, Sam? It has
yeah,
a
the ring.
halo around it.
Yeah.
It was really very cool. Absolutely. Yeah. And this conversation reminds me of the conversations I had with the Strong sisters that are now they're in Michigan. I don't know, their last name is Armstrong, and but they're called the Strong Sisters.
Aw.
I think the name of their farm is Angel Farms, but you can look them up, and you're beginning to approach it the same way they did. We had some really fun conversations years ago, so I look forward to our continued dialogue.
Aw, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for
absolutely.
chatting with us. I appreciate it. And yeah, everyone needs to go get this book to find out what the truth is.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. And let's keep the lines of communication open, and we'll do this again and again.